Hey guys, tonight we're heading into the dry, sunburnt heart of ancient Persia, where the ground crackles, the air feels like it's being reheated in an invisible oven, and the idea of ice cream sounds like a cruel joke. But here's the thing, it wasn't a joke. Somehow, in a place where eggs could fry on rooftops and sandals melted into sand, people were serving up icy rosewater desserts to kings and queens, like it was no big deal. Picture this. You're in the middle of a scorched clay courtyard, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows off domed rooftops and narrow wind towers. The scent of dates, saffron, and sweat floats in the air. And then, someone hands you a bowl of faluti, frozen rice noodles soaked in sweet syrup and lime juice. You blink, you squint. Is it a mirage? Nope. That is a real icy cold treat in your trembling desert hands. You probably won't survive a week here, let alone gather ice in July, but let's pretend you're braver than you look. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. I love seeing how far this sleepy little history caravan travels. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start by trudging across a parched courtyard, loose sand sticking to your feet. You're not royalty, not even a merchant. You're a servant, one of dozens in a grand Persian estate, whose main job today is making sure the sorbet doesn't melt. Sounds like a simple task, right? But in this heat, nothing is simple. Keeping ice from becoming water and water from becoming disappointment takes some serious planning. And luck, mostly luck. The air smells of sun-baked clay and apricots. A few pomegranate trees lean against the edge of the courtyard, their leaves curling slightly from the heat. You duck under an archway into the shaded interior of the main house where the air is cooler, not cold, but noticeably less cruel. You take a deep breath. There's a strange hum in the silence, like the soft moan of wind being funneled through the ancient stone. The lady of the house is expecting something special tonight. Rosewater ice, maybe, or chilled melon slices with syrup. She's bored of room temperature sweets. And that's where your trouble starts. You don't have ice, at least not yet. Here's the wild part. Ice was not some exotic import. No caravans brought it in on the backs of camels, wrapped in mystery silk. It was harvested, locally, in winter, and somehow stored until summer. The ancient Persians had cracked the code. They didn't have fridges, they didn't have fans, but they had a plan. The trick lay underground and above ground. They built strange bulbous structures that looked like upside-down cones poking out of the sand. Domes with thick mud brick walls, sometimes taller than houses. They were called yakhchals, which literally means ice pits. And in a world without freezers, they were nothing short of sorcery. Historians still argue whether the first yakhchals date back to the Achaemenid Empire around 400 BCE or even earlier. What we do know is that by the time of Darius and Xerxes, these ice houses dotted the landscape near important cities like Yazd and Kerman. Think of them as the Persian version of a walk-in freezer, only made of clay and geometry. And here's the science. The thick mud brick walls were made from a special mix, sand, clay, goat hair, and ash, that resisted heat and helped wick moisture. The interior was dug below ground level, creating a cool, insulated chamber. At night, the Persians would fill shallow basins with water and let them freeze under the stars. By morning, they'd gather the thin sheets of ice and store them deep inside the yakhchal, layering straw and ice like a giant baklava of chill. By midsummer, that ice was still there, still cold, still usable. That's what you're counting on tonight. You rub your arms. Partly from anxiety, partly because the thought of entering the yakhchal gives you chills, both figurative and literal. There's a heavy door at the base of the dome, flanked by stacked urns of syrup and rosewater. You duck inside. The first thing that hits you is the smell: damp stone, old straw, and a faint, almost floral coldness. It smells like winter, a scent your skin has nearly forgotten. You feel your breath fog slightly in the air. Your sandals crunch on frost-dusted straw. In the flickering torchlight, you glimpse the walls sloping inward to the narrow cone top, guiding any warm air out. Clever design. You pick your way toward the ice mound, where a few hunks of last winter's haul remain. It's precious stuff. You kneel and chip off a piece. The sound echoes like breaking glass. You shiver, whether from the chill or the wonder. You can't quite tell. There's something almost ridiculous about this moment. You, a lowly servant, are holding a chunk of frozen water that survived 6 months in the desert. You're sweating through your robe. The sun is baking the city above, and yet, somewhere nearby, a woman is about to complain that her sorbet is a little too slushy. You haul the ice back up with care, wrapping it in damp linen and hurrying through the cool corridors back to the kitchen. Every step, every wobble feels like a gamble. You know that once that ice hits the ceramic dish, its time starts ticking. You have 10, maybe 15 glorious minutes to make magic. You prepare the dessert, mixing shaved ice with syrup, garnishing it with crushed pistachio, and maybe a little mint if you're feeling dramatic. You bring it in with bowed head, arms trembling. The lady doesn't even look up from her poetry scroll. That'll be all. Typical. Still, as you walk out, you hear the faintest crunch, the spoon breaking into the ice. You grin. You did it. Against the heat, against time, you served snow in the desert. You know your role in this house now. You're the dessert servant. Not officially, of course. They never put it in writing. But every time ice needs wrangling, someone yells your name. It's probably because you haven't dropped a bowl yet. Or maybe because you're the only one small enough to crawl into the narrowest parts of the yakhchal without knocking your elbows against the precious frozen walls. Tonight, though, you're not just fetching ice, you're part of something fancier. The palace is hosting guests, some foreign, some local, all insufferably hot and entitled. That means dessert is a performance, a cool, shimmering finale to a hot, dusty day, and you're the behind-the-scenes magician. Your mission begins in the courtyard again, where copper bowls and crushed herbs wait in baskets. Nearby, an apprentice fans glowing coals under a brass pot of syrup, a blend of date sugar, cardamom, and something secret the cook refuses to name, probably rosewater. It's always rosewater. The matron cook, who everyone calls Auntie whether she's related or not, hands you a glazed bowl filled with half-frozen faluda, those thin rice noodles that shimmer like translucent threads. It's more art than food. She's muttering to herself about the heat ruining everything, but you've seen her work miracles with nothing but a damp cloth and a prayer. She knows you're the runner, the last defense between kitchen perfection and dining room disappointment. Your path to the main hall cuts through shaded corridors filled with echoing footsteps and quiet servant chatter. Someone's humming near the laundry basin. Someone else is arguing about whether the water jugs were rotated today, and someone, always, wants to know what's for dessert. Frozen again? One of the younger boys teases you as you pass. Careful, you might turn into a popsicle. You roll your eyes but smile anyway. These tiny victories, getting the dessert out on time, still cold, still intact, these are the little things that keep your reputation cool, literally. You arrive at the archway that leads into the main reception hall, The ceiling's higher here, adorned with painted stars and wooden beams. The air carries the scent of oud and citrus peels. Guests lounge on cushions, pretending not to sweat. A few peacocks shuffle along the courtyard's edge like they're trying to crash the party. You step forward, holding the bowl carefully on a polished tray. The room's too quiet. You can feel eyes on you, mostly because your arrival means the end of the meal is near, and with it, relief. You lower the tray, bow slightly, and back away. No one claps, no one gasps, but you hear someone say, Faludi again. They say the king of Sogdia was obsessed with it. You didn't know that, but you file it away. Makes sense. Anyone who tasted this would have to fall in love. The blend of texture and chill, the crunch of a cold noodle against your teeth, it's as strange as it is luxurious. You remember the first time you tried it. You nearly dropped the bowl in shock. How could something so cold, so sweet, exist here? Historians still argue whether Faluda predates modern ice cream or if it evolved alongside other early frozen treats in China and India. Some suggest Persian traders brought the idea westward. Others insist it was a happy culinary accident, born from leftover rice and too much time near a snow mound. No one agrees, but everyone agrees it's delicious. Back in the kitchen, the rest of the staff is winding down. Someone opens a flask of sour cherry wine. You sit on an overturned water jar and stretch your legs. Auntie raises an eyebrow at you. Did they like it? She asks, pretending not to care. You nod. Didn't blink. That's how you know it's perfect. She grunts. If they had blinked, I would have blamed the humidity. Outside, the wind kicks up dust in the distance, but inside, the air stays still and cool, thanks to the angled windcatchers funneling breeze through the halls. You can hear a faint whistle, the bad gear doing its job. You make a mental note to clean the vents tomorrow, or assign it to someone else. It's a dirty job, and you've got a date with a frozen pomegranate slab in the back pantry. Later, when the guests are gone and the candles burn low, you sneak one last bite. Just a spoonful, chilled just right. Not icy, not watery, balanced. You lean against the door frame and let the flavor sit on your tongue. The tartness of lime, the softness of the noodles, a crunch of ice. It's funny, isn't it? You live in one of the hottest regions on Earth, and yet here you are, licking ice like it's the most normal thing in the world. The future won't believe this. They'll think it was all camels and sand and endless thirst. But they won't know how brilliant your people were. How, night after night, you harvested cold from thin air and turned it into elegance. They also won't know how much you dreaded carrying those heavy bowls. Your arms ache, your robes are sticky, and there's always one guest who wants just a little more syrup. Still, tomorrow you'll do it again. You'll wake before the sun, check the ice reserves, argue with the boy who stacks firewood too close to the vents, and maybe, if you're lucky, sneak another bite before the nobleman's son drops his bowl again. But for now, the night belongs to you. The halls grow quiet. The yakhchal glows faintly under moonlight, and the city, hot and humming, surrenders slowly to the coolness you helped conjure. You wake up just before dawn, your dreams still half frozen with the taste of last night's faluda. The city hasn't stirred yet. The streets outside the servant quarters are quiet, except for a few early roosters and the soft creak of someone drawing water from a nearby well. But you're heading to the yakhchal again, not to fetch ice this time, but to check the structure itself, because even ancient miracles need maintenance. Walking through the courtyard, you glance up at the towering dome of the yakhchal. From afar, it looks like an upside-down bowl rising from the earth, its surface dotted with cracks and streaks of old lime plaster. Its strange geometry still amazes you. Wider at the bottom, narrowing at the top, like someone built a snow cone in the desert and dared it to melt. Inside, it's dark, still, and blessedly cool. You light a small oil lamp and crouch low. Straw mats cover most of the ground, but along the edges you can see the sloped inner walls, a design meant to direct water toward a central drainage pit when the ice begins to melt. Ingenious, really. No puddles, no waste. The melted water could even be reused. You touch the wall gently, still cold, still dry, still holding. Historians often puzzle over how yakhchals could be so effective with such simple materials. The answer lies in their structure and in something called evaporative cooling. When hot desert air hits the domed exterior, the thick walls absorb and dissipate that heat. Inside, the dry air and limited sunlight keep temperatures low enough to preserve ice through the peak of summer. Add to that the subterranean pit, where ice is stored far below surface level, and you've got a passive refrigeration system that works without a single ounce of electricity. But the real magic? That comes from the shape. The sloped walls, the narrow opening at the top, it's all designed to funnel warm air upward and out, while keeping the cool air trapped inside. You don't need a physics degree to appreciate it, but it helps to have strong knees, especially when you're crawling around checking for rat holes and leaks. You pause at a low spot where the outer plaster has started to flake. Nothing serious. You make a mental note to patch it before the next snow harvest. It's tedious work, but you've learned over time that one small crack can mean the difference between a month's worth of ice and a pool of regret. You emerge from the yakhchal blinking into the rising sun, which already feels too aggressive for this early in the day. A baker nearby is fanning his tandoor into life. The scent of singed flour and sesame oil drifts past your nose. You wave, he nods. As you walk past the kitchens, a boy stops you. He's new, still wide-eyed, still hasn't figured out how to avoid being assigned the dung cart. "You really went inside the ice dome?" he asks, eyes like full moons. You nod. "Why, you want to turn?" He shakes his head rapidly. Smart kid. Inside the main hall, the steward is already fussing over the day's menus. You catch the tail end of a debate over whether chilled melon or sweet lemon ice will better impress a visiting dignitary from Babylon. You want to interject, "Honestly, melon wins every time, but you know better. Your job isn't to speak, it's to chill quietly." Back in the storage courtyard, you take a moment to admire the system in place. It's not just the yakhchal itself that deserves applause, it's the entire infrastructure that supports it. Clay channels direct snowmelt from nearby mountains toward underground reservoirs. Shade trees are strategically planted to cool the surrounding ground. Even the placement of the yakhchal, often on the city's northern edge, maximizes shadow and minimizes exposure to afternoon sun. One of the more obscure but delightful details, some estates bred pale-colored pigeons and doves whose droppings, yes, droppings, were used in the clay mixture for better insulation. It's the kind of fact that makes historians squint in disbelief. But if it worked, it worked. And it did work. Because Persia didn't just survive the heat, they turned it into a challenge to be outsmarted. You stroll over to the side garden where an apprentice is harvesting mint and basil for tonight's chilled drinks. He looks up. "Will we run out of ice this summer?" he asks. You shrug. "Only if someone forgets to seal the dome properly." He narrows his eyes. "Was that aimed at me?" You say nothing, just keep walking. Historians still debate whether the yakhchal was a uniquely Persian invention or a shared innovation adapted across several ancient civilizations. Some point to similar storage structures in ancient Egypt or even China. But what makes the Persian model so enduring is how little it relied on luck, and how much it relied on understanding how the earth breathes. The Persian engineers of old weren't just architects, they were listeners. They paid attention to where the wind traveled, how heat pooled at different hours, how certain bricks cracked in dry seasons. They built with the kind of patience that modern HVAC systems will never know. You sit under a fig tree for a moment, your tunic sticking to your back. Somewhere, someone drops a tray. A peacock shrieks in disapproval. Another day in the service of frozen luxury. And you realize as you sip some cooled barley water from a jug left near the shade, that being a dessert servant is not just a role, it's a responsibility. You're the quiet guardian of ancient refrigeration. Now, if only they'd let you taste the lemon ice first, just to check the consistency, of course. You're back in the kitchen courtyard again, hands dusted with flour from prepping more dessert bowls. But your mind is somewhere else, on a question that's been quietly bothering you ever since you started working with the yakhchal. How exactly did the ancient Persians manage to store ice from winter all the way to July? It feels impossible, ridiculous even. You can almost hear future skeptics laughing at the idea of frozen water in the middle of a desert summer. But here you are, elbows deep in proof that it worked. And tonight you've been assigned to the winter ice inventory, a special responsibility that means you'll be heading down into the reserve vaults to count, weigh, and assess the health of this season's frozen treasure. Inventory might sound dull, but for desert dwellers it's a matter of survival and pride. You grab a torch, a tablet of wax for note-taking, and a long stick because, let's face it, you've seen a rat or two down there. The door to the lower vault groans when you push it open. A rush of cold air brushes your face. You inhale deeply. It smells like snow and straw and responsibility. The vault is carved into the bedrock, maybe 15 feet below the surface. The stairs are narrow, and the stone underfoot sweats with condensation. As you descend, your torchlight glints off frozen slabs stacked neatly in woven mats like sleeping slabs of moonlight. It's eerie and magical, like stumbling into winter's basement. You begin taking notes. This block, half melted. That one, still solid. This one, weirdly shaped. Someone clearly got lazy with the chisel. You mark it all down, careful to avoid walking directly on any ice. That's a firing offense, or at least a public shaming. No one wants warm desserts at a royal banquet just because you scuffed the glacier with your sandals. You pause for a moment at the central slab, the largest. It looks almost sculptural, layered with sediment and freeze lines, like the rings of a tree. You crouch next to it, hold out your hand. The surface is smooth, whisper cold. It hums with silence. It's wild to think how this ice got here in the first place. See, back in winter, when the nights dipped below freezing, entire teams of workers would head out to the shallow pools, artificial basins built next to the yakhchal. At dusk, they'd fill the basins with water and pray for clear skies. If the gods were kind, a thin sheet of ice would form by dawn. And then the race began. Workers used wooden shovels, their own hands, even broken bits of ceramic to lift those fragile sheets without cracking them. Each piece was laid onto straw, wrapped and carted into the yakhchal, layer upon layer, frost upon frost, until the vaults were full. And then they sealed the entrance with bricks and mud, praying it would hold until summer. Historians still argue whether this method was efficient or even humane. Some believe the laborers were paid well, even respected for their skill. Others think it was grueling, thankless work, often forced on debtors or minor criminals. As always, the truth probably lies somewhere in between a pat on the back and a slap to the face. You finish your count and begin climbing back up. The torch flickers more with every step, and your fingers are numb. But your heart is a little proud. You've just seen the secret treasure trove of the city, and you're one of the few who knows how to keep it from vanishing. Back above ground, the heat punches you in the chest like an angry oven door. You squint against the sun. A friend hands you a chilled clay cup of cucumber water. It's not fancy, but it's cold. Cold enough to make your teeth complain. You grin as you sip it. People outside your city might laugh at the idea of desert refrigeration, but you've seen it, touched it, counted it. And no matter how much the sun rages, that vault below remains a place where summer surrenders to silence. Later, over dinner in the staff hall, the steward shares some news. There's talk of constructing another yakhchal near the merchant quarter. The city's growing. Demand for ice is increasing. Some nobles have even requested that their bath water be cooled during the hotter months. Spoiled? Absolutely. But it's job security for you. You stretch your sore legs and stare into the lantern glow. Around you, the other servants laugh, eat, argue. You listen to a girl describe how she once sat inside a yakhchal for an hour just to cool off during a heat wave. Another claims she fell asleep on a slab of ice and woke up with half her braid frozen to the floor. Everyone groans. You glance out the window. The dome of the yakhchal gleams faintly in the moonlight, silent, unmoving, like a sleeping god that eats heat and breathes chill. You wonder how long these ice pits will survive. Will future generations still use them, or will they be forgotten, buried in sand and disbelief? Historians centuries from now might stumble across one and say, "Surely this couldn't be for ice, not here." And you'll smile from your little corner of history and whisper, "Oh, but it was." The next morning begins with a breeze. Not the burning kind that kicks sand into your eyes, but a rare, almost polite wind that slips between alleyways and under door frames, like a cat on patrol. You pause on the threshold of the kitchen courtyard, eyes drifting upward to the tall, narrow towers poking above the rooftops. Windcatchers, or as the older servants call them, the lazy man's miracle. They're called bedgear in Persian, and they don't look like much. Just vertical stone or mud brick chimneys with open slats on one or more sides. But they're one of the quiet geniuses of ancient Persian architecture. No fire, no fan, no gears, just smart design and a deep understanding of airflow. You squint up at one of the tallest ones on the estate, its openings gaping like the mouths of stone giants. Your job this morning? Climb inside and clean it. You sigh. The ladder groans under your weight as you ascend the side of the house, passing cracked tiles and nesting doves who glare at you like you've interrupted a sacred ritual. When you reach the base of the windcatcher, you pause. The interior is dark, cool, and faintly damp. A spider skitters away as you duck inside. Inside, it's like stepping into a whispering cave. The hot wind from outside hits the slats, gets sucked down and drops through the shaft like water through a funnel. That descending air cools slightly as it tumbles into the house below, refreshing the rooms without ever needing a fan or a servant to wave palm fronds. You press your hand to the wall. It's cool, not ice cold, but noticeably cooler than the sun outside. Here's how it works. The windcatcher faces the prevailing wind, trapping it and channeling it downward. As the hot air moves down through the narrow shaft, it loses some of its heat, especially if it passes over a pool of water or wet cloths strategically placed to boost evaporative cooling. The now tempered air drifts into living spaces through ceiling vents or hollowed walls. It's simple and brilliant. Historians still debate whether this was discovered by accident, perhaps a hole in a ceiling letting in cool air, or if it was the deliberate design of some nameless Persian architect who watched the wind for days and finally thought, what if we built a chimney, but upside down? As you scrape away a thin layer of bird droppings and dead leaves from the vent slats, you remember something Auntie once said. A good badger is like a quiet cook, does all the work, never brags. You think she meant it as a compliment to herself, but it fits here too. The elite houses in the city have massive windcatchers, some 2-3 stories tall. They can be rotated or shuttered to catch different wind directions. Some even come with subterranean tunnels that lead to underground water channels, creating an effect like natural air conditioning. No fanfare, no wires, just stone, shadow, and good timing. You finish your cleaning, your head and arms dusty, but there's a small satisfaction in knowing the wind will flow a little easier tonight. Back on the ground, you pour a basin of water over your head and let the cool droplets run down your spine. The boy from yesterday, the one with the wide eyes, watches you. So, those towers actually work? He asks. You shrug. Try sitting under one during a siesta, you'll stop asking. It's not just homes and kitchens that use these windcatchers. The public bathhouses, hammams, have them too. And sometimes when the wind hits just right, the steam rooms feel less like boiling caves and more like soft, misty cocoons. Even the markets benefit. Shopkeepers in the spice quarter position their stalls to catch wind between rows of buildings, creating breezeways that funnel through piles of cumin and turmeric. There's a whole science to city layout, and it all starts with listening to the air. You walk past one such breezeway now, watching a man use a palm fan to exaggerate the effect. He fans toward a bowl of sticky sweets, trying to keep the syrup from melting. It doesn't really work, but it makes him feel important. You duck back into the cool shadows of the palace. In the main atrium, someone has draped a wet linen cloth across a doorway, and the breeze from the windcatcher is flowing right through it. The result? Instant chill. Not snowstorm levels of cold, but enough to make the sweat on your neck evaporate. One of the house scribes passes you, pausing just long enough to murmur, "Thank the tower." He means it literally. Some people think windcatchers have spirits. Not gods exactly, but helpful air beings. You don't argue. Anyone who brings cold in this heat deserves a little worship. There's even a saying among the city's grandmothers, when you sleep beneath a windcatcher, your dreams wear sandals. No one quite knows what it means, but it sounds poetic and slightly magical. Like most things, grandmothers say. Later, over a bowl of thick yogurt and cucumbers, you find yourself sitting near one of the smaller vents. The breeze hums steadily, cooling your face. You close your eyes, and for a moment you forget it's the middle of the desert. You forget the sweat, the sun, the constant drone of heat. Because in this house, built with clay and cleverness, the wind is on your side. Tonight you're not in the kitchen. You're not patching the yakhchal or cleaning bird droppings out of windcatchers. No, tonight you've been given a different honor, though honor might be too generous a word. You're on night ice duty. It's the kind of assignment that comes whispered from a steward's mouth while avoiding eye contact, accompanied by a tone that says good luck and may the spirits take pity on you. Most servants dread this shift, not because it's dangerous unless you count jackals, but because it's tedious, freezing, and cruel to your sleep schedule. Still, someone has to do it, and tonight, that someone is you. The sky is deep violet now, the moon a thin slice above the horizon. You wrap your robe tighter, grab your tools, and shuffle toward the ice basin. It's just outside the city walls, a wide, shallow rectangle of polished stone, flanked by earth banks and reed fencing to keep out stray goats. There's no torchlight here, no sound but the occasional chirp of a night bird. It's just you, the stars, and an empty pool waiting for water. This is where the real magic of ancient Persian refrigeration happens. Most people think the yakhchal does all the work, and it does a lot, but without these night harvesting basins, there'd be nothing to store. Every winter night when the air dips low enough, teams of workers fill these basins with water a few inches deep and wait. If the night stays still and the clouds stay away, the water freezes by morning. Thin sheets at first, fragile as spun sugar. But over time, layer by layer, the ice thickens. Tonight, you're one of the ice team, which means you'll spend the next 6 hours watching water freeze. Exciting, right? You carry the clay jugs over and begin pouring. The water spreads across the basin in quiet waves. You crouch beside it, careful not to let your shadow fall across the surface. Cold likes stillness. It doesn't appreciate drama. As you wait, your mind drifts. You start naming stars in your head: the big square, the crooked eye, the archer who lost his bow. You know none of them are the real names, but they make sense to you. Behind you, the other members of the team lounge on woven mats, wrapped in woolen shawls. One of them, a wiry old man named Harun, is already chewing dried figs and muttering about how ice used to form faster in his day. Another younger boy shuffles over and sets down a bowl of glowing coals to warm your feet. You nod in thanks, even though the heat feels like an insult out here. Warmth is the enemy tonight. The moon climbs higher. You peer into the basin. There it is, the first shimmer. It looks like a trick of the eye at first. A glimmer, a distortion in the water's surface. But then you tap the edge with a fingertip and feel it, the sharp, thin shell of fresh ice. You grin. The night has agreed to cooperate. Now comes the hard part. You kneel beside the basin and, using a hooked reed tool, start lifting the sheets of ice one at a time. They're delicate, barely thicker than parchment. You slide each one onto a straw mat laid out nearby. Then you cover it with more straw and repeat. The wind picks up slightly, brushing across your cheek. You whisper a thank you to the air. Historians still debate whether the Persians invented this layered ice harvesting technique independently, or if it spread from earlier methods used in northern China or along Central Asian trade routes. What's clear is that this process, collecting thin sheets of ice nightly and storing them like slices of frozen bread, was precise. It required coordination, timing, and, above all, patience. You work through the night. Occasionally, a dog howls far away. The city feels like another planet from out here. There's no shouting, no peacocks, no one asking about syrup, and just cold and stars. By the time dawn stains the sky pale gold, you've stacked 15 sheets of ice. Not bad, not your best, but not embarrassing. Harun nods with the grim approval of a man who once fell into the basin during a snow squall and claims to have survived by sheer will. You wrap the top layer with more straw, and 4 of you lift the bundle onto a flat wooden sled. 2 oxen wait nearby, chewing lazily on hay and pretending not to care that their morning has begun too early. With groaning effort, the sled begins its slow, creaky journey back to the yakhchal. You walk alongside it, stretching your stiff fingers. The sun is still low, but you can already feel the promise of heat returning to the land. When you reach the dome, a kitchen apprentice opens the storage door. Inside, the cool, breathless air greets you like an old friend. You stack the ice carefully, watching the condensation form and then vanish again. Job done. You wipe your brow with a sleeve and sit on a nearby bench, someone hands you a sweet date and a cup of warm milk. You accept both like a hero returning from battle. The others might not understand. They don't see the thin line between too late and just in time, between icy sorbet and melted soup. But you do. And so, you eat your date, sip your milk, and smile at the dome that swallowed the night's labor. It will keep the desserts cold. It will make the nobles smile. And no one, not a single one of them, will know that it all began with your frozen hands and a whispered prayer to a still desert night. You wake up sore, which is typical after night ice duty. Your legs feel like cooked lentils, and your arms still buzz with the memory of lifting frozen slabs in the dark. But there's no time to lie around groaning like an overstuffed camel. Today, the estate architect is giving a tour to a group of visiting scribes, and guess who's been assigned to carry the model yakhchal? That's right, you. It's a miniature, about the size of a fat house cat, carved from sun-dried clay and painted with lines that map out its geometry. You carry it like it's made of sugar glass, walking 3 steps behind the architect and trying not to trip over your own robes. The scribes are dressed in flowing silk, each of them squinting into the sun like it's done them personal harm. They pause in front of the real yakhchal, towering above them, its shadow sprawled like a sleeping beast across the courtyard. This, the architect says, is not just a structure, it's a symphony of mud, wind, and math. You roll your eyes, you've heard this spiel before. He goes on to explain how the yakhchal's walls are made of saruj, a unique Persian composite of sand, clay, lime, ash, and goat hair. The result? A nearly waterproof, heat-resistant material that can outlast earthquakes, sandstorms, and nosy mice. You know this is true. You once saw a wall take a direct hit from a runaway ox cart. The ox didn't make it. The wall did. He gestures toward the top. Notice the tapered dome. Hot air rises, always, and this shape forces it up and out. Meanwhile, the interior stays cool, especially when you layer the walls thick enough. One of the scribes raises a hand. But why the conical shape? Good question, the architect says, smiling like a proud tutor. It reduces the surface area exposed to the sun, and the angled sides help shed rain, if you're lucky enough to get any. More importantly, the shape directs airflow, guiding heat upward, while cool air pools below. You shift your weight, trying not to sigh audibly. He's right, of course. The geometry is clever, brilliant even. But you've scrubbed enough ice pits to know that brilliance isn't always comfortable. Historians still argue whether this dome shape originated in Persia or was adapted from earlier Mesopotamian storage silos. Some believe it's a modified version of old ziggurat foundations. Others insist it emerged independently through local trial and error. What no one disputes is that the results were impressive. You kneel down and set the model yakhchal on a polished stone slab so the scribes can take a closer look. They lean in, murmuring, one of them even sketching its outline with a reed pen. The architect nods as if he designed the real one himself. You can think of the yakhchal as a passive engineer. He continues, it doesn't move, it doesn't speak, but it works day and night against the sun's tyranny without complaint. You almost laugh. If it did complain, it would probably demand better insulation and less foot traffic on its roof. As the tour wraps up, you retrieve the model, cradling it carefully. One of the younger scribes lingers behind, looking thoughtful. It's just mud and wind, he says, more to himself than to you, but it defeats summer. You nod. Every time. Back in the shade of the workshop, you return the model to its storage shelf and flop down beside the brick pile, letting your back relax against a stack of half-cured tiles. You pull your scarf low over your face to block the light, but the sounds around you keep drifting in. Someone's hammering a vent frame. Someone else is arguing about the angle of a courtyard corner. It all boils down to one thing: coolness. Everyone in this estate, architects, cooks, servants, is fighting heat in their own way. And one of the most overlooked heroes in that battle: mud bricks. Simple, right? Just clay and straw, mixed with water and dried in the sun. But there's an art to it. The right ratio of ingredients, the right drying time, the right placement in the walls. Mud bricks are not glamorous. They don't sparkle. They don't smell like rosewater. But without them, no yakhchal, no windcatcher, no palace would survive more than a few summers. You run your fingers over one nearby, admiring the uneven surface. Some bear fingerprints from workers long gone. Some are cracked, some perfect. Each one carries a bit of earth and sweat, and all of them together build something cooler than logic. There's a saying among bricklayers here: the sun respects a well-laid wall. You've never understood if that's a threat or a compliment, but it feels true. A good wall keeps the heat out, not with force, but with quiet precision. You close your eyes for a moment and let the idea settle. In the world of ancient Persia, luxury didn't come from gold or gemstones, not in the middle of July. It came from shadow, from geometry, from the miracle of stepping into a room where the temperature dropped 10 degrees and your bones finally stopped vibrating. And all of it, the domes, the wind, the bricks, the basins, the math, worked together like a secret symphony playing a lullaby for the sun. By early afternoon, the estate is a shimmering mirage of sun and shadow. The stone paths are too hot to touch. Birds hop from one shaded tile to the next like frantic dancers, and the kitchen smells like someone accidentally left a pot of cumin on the roof. You, of course, are exactly where no sane person wants to be right now, inside the royal banquet prep room, helping prepare frozen feasts for tonight's visiting dignitaries. The lord of the house has decided this banquet will be unforgettable. That usually means three things: imported figs, musicians who aren't allowed to blink too loudly, and desserts that have to arrive so cold they hurt your teeth. You're in the kitchen's cold chamber now, crouched beside a long marble counter, surrounded by assistants slicing fruit into perfect geometric shapes. You're shaving ice off a block using a bronze grater that's seen better decades. Every curl of ice that falls into the large mixing bowl is precious. You catch yourself gripping the tool tighter than necessary. There's no backup block today. This is it. Auntie, stern as ever, hovers nearby, instructing the syrup boys to keep their rosewater concentrate just tart enough to surprise, not sour enough to insult. She's already rejected 3 batches and sworn under her breath at least twice. You pour the shaved ice into a polished clay bowl, then drizzle syrup infused with saffron, cardamom, and honey over the top. A few pomegranate seeds, a sprinkle of dried mint. The result is a shimmering, jewel-colored delight that would look right at home in a crown. This is sharbat, the queen of cold Persian desserts. Historians note that these sorbets, flavored crushed ice and syrups, weren't just for taste. They were prestige. A well-executed bowl meant power, resources, intelligence. To have ice in July was one thing. To serve it infused with imported spices in a gold-trimmed bowl? That was a political statement. Look at me, it said. I command the seasons. Tonight's feast will include several frozen delights. First, the classic rosewater sharbat, then a creamy, chilled yogurt dish served with cucumber and dill, known to trigger dramatic sighs of delight from guests unaccustomed to cool dairy in the desert. And finally, Auntie's latest innovation, pomegranate granita, frozen just enough to be spoonable but not so hard it makes noblemen break a tooth. The dining hall is already being dressed in gauze and silver, the floor swept with rose petals, the fountain refreshed. In the background, two young girls rehearse a soft lute melody while trying not to make eye contact with the steward, who will scold them for breathing wrong. Your role, of course, is invisible but vital. You're the silent transporter of cold, the sherbet shadow, the sorbet shepherd. As you carry out the first tray, you're struck again by the absurdity of it all. That this bowl of icy heaven, garnished with basil leaves and wild violet petals, was born in a world of heat and dust. It almost feels like cheating, but this is what the Persians excelled at, taking the unbearable and turning it elegant. You move from table to table, placing bowls carefully. The guests nod with practiced disinterest. One woman murmurs something about a similar dish she had in Persepolis. Someone else asks whether this batch uses Shiraz grapes or the inferior kind from the northern mountains. You bite your tongue, and then comes the best part. You step into the shaded alcove reserved for staff and watch them take the first bite. Spoons dip, eyes close, shoulders relax. It's like watching winter happen inside their faces. You don't get applause. No one leaps from their silk cushions to congratulate you. But you know, you see it. That brief flicker of childlike glee in someone's expression as cold fruit syrup melts on their tongue and reminds them that not everything in the world is fire. And you remember your first time. You were maybe 10. Auntie had passed you a sliver of rose ice behind the kitchen curtains and said, "Here, don't choke on it." You didn't, but you did forget how to talk for a solid minute. Your mouth felt like a garden had bloomed on your tongue. Now, as an almost adult with aching knees and calloused palms, you still chase that feeling. And tonight, you gave it to someone else. Historians still argue whether Persian sorbets influenced the later Italian granita and French glace. Some trace the lineage from Arab traders. Others insist on simultaneous invention. But no matter what came later, this moment right here is Persian to the core. Outside, the sun finally begins to soften. The shadow of the yakhchals stretches long across the courtyard, cool and proud. You return to the kitchen for the final round of service. As you pass a mirror-polished tray of pistachio-crowned yogurt cups, Auntie mutters, "Tell them the ice is weeping if they ask why it's slightly melted." You nod solemnly. Got it. Emotional ice. She chuckles once, just once, and then goes back to grumbling about cardamom ratios. You deliver the last tray, then slip outside, away from the guests, into the quiet. You dip your hand in the garden fountain and lean back against a sun-warmed wall. One more frozen feast, served in a fire-born world. You close your eyes and smile. You're elbow deep in crushed ice again, which is becoming something of a theme in your life. But today's task feels different. It's not for nobles or stewards or guests with opinions about basil placement. No, today you're helping prepare a frozen dish for yourself, sort of. Okay, technically you're assisting the estate's physician, who's experimenting with cooling treatments for fevers, and who also happens to love dessert more than medicine. He's convinced that frozen food might be both a luxury and a cure. His latest obsession? An icy sweet called Faluda, and he insists it's the ancient ancestor of modern ice cream. You're not sure about that. You just know it's delicious. He waves you into the workroom, a strange blend of medical lab and kitchen. On one side, dried herbs hang from beams. On the other, jars of sour cherries, honey and lemon peel glisten in the morning light. There's a chilled slab of ice wrapped in linen at the center, sitting in a basin of snow harvested just last night. "Hand me the noodle press," the doctor says, adjusting his crooked spectacles. "And be quick, Faluda waits for no one." You pass it to him, a bronze device that looks like it might also be used for torturing fish. He loads it with a rice flour dough and begins squeezing out thin, translucent strands directly onto the ice slab. They steam slightly as they hit the cold, then stiffen into something that looks like glassy worms, unappetizing to some, heavenly to you. Next comes the syrup, sugar, lime juice, and rose water, poured carefully over the rice noodles. The result is a cold, floral, tart, and slightly chewy mixture that dances between textures. It's weird, it's ancient, and it's perfect. "Try it," he says. You do. Your eyebrows lift. It's colder than expected, softer, sweeter, with a zing of lime that makes your teeth complain and your tongue sing. You close your eyes for a moment. "So?" he asks, watching you with the intensity of someone awaiting a life-changing diagnosis. You nod slowly. "I feel cured." He laughs. "Told you." Historians still argue whether Faluda qualifies as the first form of ice cream. Some say it lacks the cream element. Others argue that ice cream didn't always mean dairy. A few fringe scholars believe Faluda was part of an early medicinal food regimen intended to cool the body and soothe the soul. The truth is probably somewhere between treat and tonic. The doctor continues to explain the history of sweet frozen things, muttering to himself as he records the consistency in a scroll no one will read. You let the second bite melt slowly in your mouth and think about the absurd journey that frozen desserts have taken across empires, mountains, languages. From your perch on a dusty cushion, it's not hard to imagine ancient travelers swapping cold secrets along the Silk Roads. A Chinese herbalist whispers of snow-infused plum wine. A Persian cook shares tips on layering ice with mint and berries. A Roman noble sneaks imported alpine snow into his villa to chill grape mush. You finish the bowl and help clean the tools. The doctor thanks you with a wink and says, "Tell no one about this batch. The nobles will want it, and I'm not sharing." You walk back to the servants' quarters feeling lighter, cooler, partly from the dessert, partly from the quiet joy of something made just for pleasure. That night, as you pass by the dining hall on your way to refill water jars, you hear someone complaining about their sherbet being too grainy. You resist the urge to walk in and yell, "Try rice noodles next time." Instead, you smile to yourself. The truth is, Faluda is a bit weird. The noodles are unexpected. The texture is unlike anything people expect from dessert. But that's what makes it beautiful. That's what makes it yours. And you suspect it may have paved the way for something greater. Ice cream, in all its modern creamy glory, might owe a quiet bow to your people, to their patience, their creativity, their love of cold sweetness in a land ruled by heat. As you make your way toward the courtyard, you pass the small herb garden where a cluster of mint leaves rustle under the breath of a passing breeze. You pluck one and tuck it behind your ear, just a little flourish, a private reminder of today's recipe. Back in your corner of the kitchen, you prepare your evening cup of barley water and sit down, letting your bones settle. The stars begin to stretch across the sky like silver thread on blue velvet. Somewhere nearby, a child laughs, a bowl clinks. And you wonder, hundreds of years from now, will people still talk about this? Will they imagine you, anonymous, barefoot, scraping snow into a bowl with your fingers? Will they know about the doctor and his sweet tooth? Will they remember that long before refrigeration, long before freezers, people like you created cold joy in the middle of fire? You lean back, sip your drink, and think, they'd better. The next morning, you're assigned to the outer quarter of the estate, not the elegant courtyard, with its manicured fig trees and mosaic fountains, but the lower servants' area, where laundry lines stretch like spider webs. And the air always smells faintly of soap, lentils, and optimism gone slightly stale. And for once, you're kind of excited, because today you're helping install something rare, a cooling jar system for the common folk. It's a small project, the steward says, just a few clay jars, some rope, and a few bricks, which, as you now know, usually means back-breaking work with results that look suspiciously like a miracle when it's done right. You make your way to the shaded wall behind the bakery, where the sun doesn't strike directly until late afternoon. It's the perfect spot, cooler than most, already protected by nearby trees, and positioned to catch the early evening breeze. 3 giant porous clay jars wait there like oversized chess pieces. Their surfaces are rough, peppered with tiny holes and patterns, carved by an artisan with a love for swirls and patience. The jars are zier pots, unglazed, unpainted, and kind of magical. You wipe the rim of one and feel the coolness under your palm. These jars work through evaporative cooling, the same principle behind the yakhchal, but on a smaller, more intimate scale. Water seeps slowly through the porous surface, evaporates into the dry air, and steals heat in the process. The result? The inside of the jar stays several degrees cooler than the air around it. Cool enough to store butter, or a melon, or even chilled barley porridge for breakfast. One of the laundry women walks past, sees the jars, and raises an eyebrow. Gonna put sherbet in those too? You grin. Only if you promise not to drink it all. She laughs and shakes her head. Just make sure my butter doesn't turn into soup. With help from 2 boys from the stable, you start building the base. A ring of bricks to lift the jars off the ground and allow airflow underneath. Then comes the rope system, thick woven cords soaked in water and draped around the jar's midsection, increasing surface moisture and cooling speed. It's like dressing a jar in wet clothes and letting the desert sun do the rest. By midday, the system is up and working. One jar already has condensation forming around its base. You open the lid and peek inside. A ceramic bowl of leftover stew sits cool, almost chilled. You nod, impressed. These jars aren't fancy. They aren't decorated with gold leaf or engraved with poetry, but they're essential. Historians often focus on palaces, banquets, kings, but it's here, behind the laundry lines and between the bread ovens, that the real refrigeration story lives. Because nobility could afford ice. The rest of the city had to be clever. People buried food in clay pots lined with damp sand. They stored herbs in shady nooks wrapped in wet cloth. They built underground shelves lined with copper to draw heat away from wine jugs. It wasn't pretty, it was practical. And sometimes practical is more miraculous than gilded splendor. You sit in the shade with a bowl of cool cucumber soup scooped from the very jar you helped install. The air is heavy, the kind of heat that sticks to your ribs. But the soup is fresh, tangy, and, against all odds, refreshing. One of the boys from the stable joins you. Did you know my grandfather used to store cheese under the chicken coop? He says. You blink. That sounds unhygienic. Yeah, but it stayed cold, and nobody stole it. You laugh harder than you should. Maybe it's the heat. Maybe it's the joy of knowing that while nobles are busy arguing over which type of rose syrup pairs best with shaved snow, you just helped the laundry girl save her butter from ruin. Historians still argue whether the widespread use of zier pots originated in Persia or diffused through trade from North Africa. Some scholars trace early versions to Egyptian tombs. Others point to rural Indian villages that still use them today. Wherever they came from, they stuck around for one reason. They worked. Later that evening, You stroll past the jars again and find the same laundry woman placing a bowl of yogurt inside one. She nods at you without looking up. "It's colder than the pantry," she mutters. "Might start hiding sweets in there." You wink? "I won't tell." Back in your corner of the courtyard, the sky turns a soft shade of peach and the wind returns, a lazy breath curling through the alleyways. It brushes your cheek, and you lean into it instinctively. Somewhere nearby, a child is arguing with a fig tree. A peacock groans dramatically. And in this moment, surrounded by mud, rope, cracked jars, and people who never expect anything fancy, you realize something important. Cold doesn't have to be spectacular. It just has to be enough to keep your food fresh, enough to help you sleep, enough to let you believe, even for a second, that the desert isn't winning. And today, for the common folk, you made that happen. As night falls and the estate finally begins to exhale the heat of the day, you find yourself assigned to what's arguably the least glamorous duty of all: assisting the wardrobe steward with desert fashion maintenance. Yes, fashion. You think it's going to be a boring task involving folding robes and polishing sandals. But as soon as you step into the linen hall, you're met with a rack of damp garments and a wave of oddly cool air. The room smells of lavender and vinegar, an ancient combination for preserving fabric and keeping clothes breathable in a furnace-like climate. And that's when you realize this isn't just clothing, this is a whole strategy of survival. The steward, a tall, fastidious man named Farzan, with wrists like tree branches and eyes that never blink, hands you a bundle of folded cloth and says, "Unwrap it carefully. That's one of the cool weave robes." You glance at him, eyebrows raised. "There's such a thing?" He rolls his eyes. "Of course. You think nobles survive 45 degrees in heavy silk? They wear tana abreshi, fabric woven loose enough for air to pass, but dense enough to block sun. It breathes better than you do." You obey, unwrapping the bundle like it might explode. Inside is a pale, sand-colored robe that feels suspiciously light. It's been dampened and dried in the wind, giving it a cool, crisp texture. As you hold it up, it seems to shimmer, not with gold thread, but with engineering. Persian desert clothing, Farzan explains, was never about luxury. It was about layers. The outer robe protects from sun, the inner tunic absorbs sweat. A third optional wrap, usually cotton or linen, acts like a portable shade cloth. And sandals? Those aren't just footwear. Many are lined with wool to prevent the sole from heating up like a frying pan. "Wait, wool in sandals?" you ask, skeptical. He nods. "Desert paradoxes. Trust them." Historians still debate how much of this fashion knowledge was formalized versus instinctive. Some argue ancient weavers were guided by centuries of experimentation. Others suggest trade routes brought ideas from Egypt, India, and Arabia, creating a kind of clothing melting pot where every thread was tested by sand and sweat. You learn how to fold a robe so it doesn't crease where it matters. You watch as Farzan uses a heated bronze pin to press the front flap, muttering that a wrinkled sash is a public offense in royal company. But the most fascinating part isn't the clothing, it's the jewelry. "Cooling bangles," he says, holding up a delicate silver bracelet filled with a tiny amount of quicksilver. The idea is the metal absorbs body heat. You wear it on your wrists or ankles, helps trick your blood into feeling colder. You blink. "That actually works?" He shrugs. "Enough to be fashionable." Some households even chill their jewelry before wearing it. There's a small clay box in the corner of the wardrobe room with a shard of ice inside and several rings laid out on top, soaking up the cold. One of the maids walks in and dips a copper comb into the ice box, then runs it through her hair with a satisfied sigh. "Cool head, calm tongue," she says. "You're beginning to understand. Everything here, even in clothing, is part of the great Persian war against heat. You return to your quarters and examine your own robe. It's rough spun, patched twice, and holds the scent of cumin, smoke, and about a week's worth of labor. But as you lie down, you try folding it like Farzan showed you. One layer wrapped loosely over your chest, another under your knees. And it works. You feel a little less sticky, a little more tolerable. The window vent creaks open just slightly with the evening breeze. You hear someone humming in the laundry yard. Somewhere in the distance, a peacock complains about something trivial. You let your eyes drift closed. Because maybe, just maybe, in a land where sun rules the sky and cold is a whispered secret, a properly folded robe and a chilled bracelet are enough to make you feel powerful. Not like a king, but like a survivor. The next morning, you find a note wedged under your bowl of lentils. "Meet the steward. Bring your sandals." You groan. Nothing good ever follows that sentence. Turns out, you've been chosen for a special errand, a diplomatic dessert delivery. One of the local tax collectors, stationed in a nearby village, sent word that his supply of ice has inexplicably stopped arriving, which translated from bureaucrat speak means he's grumpy, overheated, and has possibly threatened to fine the estate if someone doesn't bring him a bowl of sharbat immediately. "Take it to him," the steward says, handing you a tightly wrapped ice pack and a sealed bowl of cold melon syrup. Smile. Don't speak. Pretend you like him. You do not. But you put on your best sandals and begin the long walk down the dusty road, ice cradled like a newborn, bowl balanced on a tray as though it contains a secret, which in a way it does. The tax collector lives in a stone house that looks like it was designed by someone who hated visitors. As you approach, you hear raised voices. A door slams. A goat yells at no one in particular. You knock anyway. A guard eyes you, then lets you through with a grunt. Inside, the collector lounges on a shaded divan, fanning himself with what appears to be a stolen scroll. "Is it cold?" he asked, skipping any greeting. You unwrap the bundle. The bowl gleams with condensation. A mint leaf floats gently on the surface like a smug little boat. He sniffs it. Acceptable. You stand there in silence, sweat dripping down your back. "You know," he says between sips, "there was a time when only the Shah could afford ice in summer. Now every merchant's brat expects frozen melon with dinner. Ridiculous." You nod, biting the inside of your cheek. He continues. "People forget. Ice is power. It's stored privilege. Whoever controls the yakhchal controls the city." You hadn't thought of it that way before, but he's not wrong. Historians still debate how ice was distributed among the classes in ancient Persia. Some argue that in times of drought or war, ice was rationed, taxed, or even hoarded. There are records, vague, cryptic, of uprisings, sparked not over land or money, but over who got the last bowl of snow. In fact, the very existence of ice taxes, yes, taxes on frozen water, is well documented. Some estates had to pay a percentage of their winter ice reserves to the regional governor. Others were required to send regular deliveries to the capital. In return, they received cooling rights, which sounds fake, but wasn't. You remember Auntie telling a story once about a woman who got married simply because her family promised her future husband unlimited ice access through the summer. You thought she was joking. Now you're not so sure. The tax collector finishes his drink and waves you off without so much as a thank you. Typical. You trudge back toward the estate, feet dusty, mouth dry, wondering what it would feel like to own cold instead of just delivering it. Halfway home, you pass a merchant caravan unloading crates of dried fruit. One of the guards sees your empty bowl and chuckles. Let me guess, ice tax? You nod. Worst kind, he says. Can't even bribe your way out of it. Either it's cold or it isn't. Back at the estate, you drop off the tray and slump onto a shaded bench, fanning yourself with a scrap of papyrus. Auntie walks by, sees your face, and offers you a spoonful of leftover faluda. Rough day? You nod, mouth full of lime and noodles. She lowers herself beside you and says, "People think ice is just dessert. It's not. It's the difference between comfort and cruelty, between nobles and everyone else." You swallow and nod again. "And that tax collector," she adds, "used to be a kitchen boy. Got promoted after snitching about syrup rations." You almost choke on your faluda. "He what?" "Mm-hmm," she says. "Watch your syrup. He still has opinions." You both laugh, quietly. The kind of laugh that feels slightly dangerous in this heat. Later, as the sky shifts to copper and shadow, you think again about that phrase. Ice is power. You've always thought of yourself as a server, a slicer of melons, a carrier of cold things. But now, you wonder. You wonder how many dynasties have risen and fallen on whether a king got his dessert chilled. You wonder who counted the bowls, who made the rules, who in the background kept the cold from disappearing. And maybe, just maybe, you already know.
It's late evening and the kitchen is finally quieted. The fires are out, the bowls are stacked, and for once, no one is arguing about syrup. You're folding towels when you overhear two scribes discussing something in the corridor just beyond the herb pantry. "Did you hear," one says, "about the theory with the straws?" "Straws?" the other snorts. "What straws?" You pause. You should not care. And yet your ears stretch like bread dough. Some scholars think the Persians used drinking straws, long gold ones, for cold drinks, maybe even flavored ices. You drop your towel. Straws? You poke your head around the corner. "Sorry," you interrupt. "Did you say gold straws?" They glance at each other, mildly surprised. One scribe shrugs. There's a theory, mostly from Mesopotamian references, but a few suggest that elite Persians had slender tubes made from precious metals for drinking cool syrups without disturbing the presentation, maybe even to avoid getting sticky hands. You blink. So they sipped sharbat through a tube? The scribe nods. Possibly. Historians still argue whether it was decorative, ceremonial, or practical, or if it even happened. The records are vague. You think about this all night, because the idea of people sipping lime ice through a tiny gold pipe while you're out hauling 40-pound ice slabs across courtyards is just maddening enough to be true. The next morning you decide to investigate. You ask Auntie. You ask Farzan, the wardrobe steward. You even ask Harun, the old ice cutter. None of them confirm it, but none of them deny it either. Farzan says, "Wouldn't surprise me. They use gold spoons for syrup. Why not tubes?" Harun just grunts. Anything to keep their hands clean. You start noticing things. There's a delicate reed tool in the back of the pantry that could easily pass for a straw. A narrow silver rod in the Lord's private tea set that you always assumed was a stirrer. And you remember now, the lady of the house once saying, "The first sip is everything. The rest is just temperature." Temperature. Presentation. Cold without contact. It makes sense. Historians may not agree, but lived experience rarely waits for scroll approval. And the more you think about it, the more you see a pattern. Cold desserts weren't just about taste. They were performances, a kind of edible theater. Picture it. A noblewoman reclining on a shaded couch, faluda before her in a crystal bowl. Her servant pours pomegranate syrup over the top. She lifts a golden straw to her lips and sips. No spoon, no splash, no effort. You wouldn't believe it if you hadn't seen similar setups. The royal family drinks everything with pomp and ritual. Why not this? You ask the physician. He tilts his head. Technically plausible, he says. There are Babylonian references to tube sipping and cooling tonics. Could have crossed into Persian habits. And besides, don't nobles love gadgets? You start watching more carefully. One evening, you spot the youngest noble daughter using a thin, hollow rod to drink chilled, sour cherry juice. You wait until she leaves, then sneak over to inspect it. It's gold. Hollow. About the width of your little finger. You smirk. So it's true. And here's the strange part. You're kind of delighted. Not angry, not jealous. Delighted. Because now you get to tell the other servants. And the look on Auntie's face when you describe the straw? Priceless. She can't use a spoon like the rest of us? She didn't want to disturb the ice structure, you reply, mimicking the noble tone. Auntie laughs so hard she drops a basket of mint leaves. You start calling the gold straw the tongue of the lazy, and it becomes an inside joke among the kitchen staff. Should we give him a gold straw? Someone says whenever a guest complains. Only if he asks nicely, someone else replies. The scribes might still be arguing in candlelit rooms. The historians might demand evidence. But you know the truth. And the truth is, the ancient Persians didn't just master cold. They mastered how to make it look effortless. And sometimes that's just as powerful. Today is Transport Day. Not for you, thankfully, but for the engineers. The ones who maintain the qanats, those impossibly long underground tunnels that carry snowmelt from the mountains to the city like hidden arteries of cold. But you're interested for a different reason. Word has it that an architect from India is in town, here to study Persian cooling technology. That alone would be exciting. Foreigners rarely make the trek just to admire mud bricks, but the real whisper making the rounds is this. He's building a yakhchal of his own. In India, you can't help it. You have to meet him. You loiter near the front gate until the steward's voice cracks across the courtyard. If you have time to lean, you have time to clean. Classic. So you grab a broom and shuffle casually toward the visitor's quarters, just in time to spot him entering the courtyard with 3 attendants and a stack of scrolls. He's older than you expected. Eyes sharp, hair streaked with gray, hands stained with ink and some kind of berry, apparently. His name is Dinesh, and when he sees you sweeping, he waves. Come, he says. Tell me what you know about windcatchers. You blink. I know they make summers survivable. He grins. That's already more than most. You spend the next hour walking him through the estate's layout, the placement of the badger, the slope of the channels that carry cold air into the lower rooms, the way wet cloths are used to amplify the cooling effect. He listens, sketching fast and loose, nodding often, muttering things like, so obvious and yet so ignored. Later, you sneak him a glimpse inside the yakhchal. He crouches, fingertips grazing the curved wall like a potter, admiring the lip of a finished bowl. This, he whispers, is genius. He explains how in parts of India, particularly in Gujarat and Rajasthan, they also fight the heat with architecture, thick walls, internal courtyards, shaded water tanks, but they haven't yet built anything quite like the yakhchal. Until now, he adds with a sly smile. Historians do agree that Persian cooling tech influenced other regions, especially as trade intensified across the Islamic world and beyond. The domed ice houses show up in parts of Egypt by the 9th century. Mughal architecture borrowed windcatcher concepts for palaces in Delhi. Even modern desert towns still echo ancient layouts, narrow alleys, whitewashed walls, clever airflow. Still, Dinesh seems particularly struck by how seamlessly form meets function here. It's not just cold, he says, it's cold with grace. And he's right. Back in the kitchen, you overhear Auntie say something about how the Indian visitor asked for a tasting tray of every frozen dessert on the estate. You're not surprised. People who study cold usually like to eat it too. That night, you serve him a bowl of falude with basil and lemon, and he closes his eyes in reverent silence. When he finally speaks, it's soft. This I will copy shamelessly. You laugh. Just promise you'll keep the part where we carry the ice barefoot through goat traffic. He raises his bowl to international inspiration. And just like that, you feel it, something bigger. You've always thought of this knowledge as local, even secret. But maybe it's more than that. Maybe it's a gift, and one meant to travel. The next day, Dinesh leaves, scrolls full, eyes sparkling. You watch him go and imagine a new dome rising in a faraway land shaped by Persian ideas, born of Indian earth. A cousin to your own yakhchal, halfway across the world. And when someone asks him, "Where did you learn this?" you hope he remembers the barefoot servant with a broom and a brain full of wind. Because sometimes history travels not on the backs of kings or scholars, but on the breath of those who simply know. You wake up before sunrise, the air still soft with the promise of a cooler morning. There's a strange hush over the estate. No shouting from the stables, no clattering pans in the kitchen yet. You step outside and see the sky painted in layers of indigo and peach. It's beautiful. But something feels final. Today is your last shift on ice duty for the season. The calendar stone in the steward's courtyard shows the mid-mark of summer, when the last reliable reserves of ice are tallied, portioned, and gently, carefully used. After this, the city must wait for winter's mercy to return. You make your way to the yakhchal one more time. The dome is the same as always, solid, proud, indifferent. You duck through the door and descend into the cool belly of the earth, where the last slabs of ice sleep beneath straw blankets. They look smaller now, a little rougher at the edges, but they're still holding on. You sit for a moment on a dry ledge and just listen. Not for anything in particular, just to hear the silence. Above you, the badger hums faintly, letting in a thread of breeze. You think about the hundreds of bowls you've served, the syrup stains on your robe, the times you tripped over a cat and nearly dropped an entire tray of falude, the look on a noblewoman's face when her dessert was only slightly chilled, instead of bite your tongue cold. You think about the pride you didn't know you had, the slow, steady kind that grows with every shovel of snow and every spoon of melon ice. There's something comforting in the routine. You weren't a warrior, you weren't a scholar, but you were part of the invisible machinery that made life in the desert possible. You kept people cool. You made unbearable heat bearable. You, of all people, helped bring winter to summer. And now, as the last bits of ice vanish, you feel the empire itself begin to shift. Whispers around the estate say the royal court may move north. Water is harder to come by this year. The mountains sent less snow. The nobles are restless. Even Auntie seems quieter than usual. You carry one last bowl of ice to the hall, not for a guest this time, but for the old master of the house, once stern, now softened by age and heat. He nods as you set it before him. No words, just a quiet thank you, heavy with understanding. And in that silence, you realize something is ending. Not just your shift, not just the ice, but a way of life. Historians will later argue about when the Persian ice tradition began to fade. Some blame political upheaval, others cite trade disruptions, climate change, or shifting tastes. But you think it's more than that. You think cold, like all magic, has its moment. And when that moment passes, it leaves behind stories. Stories like yours. You step outside for the last time, looking back once at the yakhchal. The sun creeps higher, but the dome still casts its shadow. A cool reminder that once, in this land of fire, people carved cold from the sky and held it in their hands. You touch the stone and whisper something no one hears. Then you walk away. The air warms, but you don't. And now, as the last light fades behind the horizon of ancient Persia, you settle into the quiet of dusk. The yakhchals stands behind you, its dome catching the silver of the moon like a giant ear listening to time. The courtyard is still. The air is dry and still warm, but not heavy anymore. Just a gentle blanket that wraps around your limbs like familiar linen. You close your eyes and breathe in. The scent of clay, mint, and old stone lingers in the air. Somewhere in the distance, a soft splash from a fountain. A breeze. Barely a breath, really. But it's there. Like the whisper of the badger calling down the wind. Your thoughts begin to slow. Each memory of shaved ice, each image of straw-packed vaults and chilled syrup bowls drifts across your mind like soft snowflakes melting before they land. Nothing to carry, nothing to hold on to. Just the sensation of coolness passing through you, gentle and light. The story of cold in a hot world is now part of your dreams. A tale of clever hands, patient nights, and quiet miracles born from earth and air. And you were there. You felt the ice in your fingers. You carried it. You shaped it. And now, as the fire of the day disappears completely, all that's left is stillness. Sleep now, under the same moon that once watched over ancient domes of mud and frost. Let the wind catch you. Let it cool you. Let it carry you into dreams as soft and slow as falling snow.